So the reason why I put this up is so that there's no misunderstandings. It's the other Queen's University in Canada as opposed to Belfast, I think. Isn't that Queen's University of Belfast? So you over there, this is Queen's University, Belfast. I live in Kingston, Ontario. So what I wanted to talk about today is to give you some pretty preliminary information on the evolution of themes that were published in bioethics, and it's not the journal Bioethics, but in major bioethics journals during the last 25 years. I intend to do this in two parts. I want to first look at the question of empirical bioethics, and then look at specific substantive ethical analyses and the types of topics that people were concerned about that did not just engage in surveys. The second half of this presentation, which probably is just about as long as the first half, as you have seen in the abstract that I provided, is that I also want to look at a bit at the evolution of bioethics publishing in academic journals during the last 25 years. And mostly I want to look at the implication of technological changes that we have seen to both how we publish, who we reach, what information we gather from that, and what the impact of all of that is on the integrity of bioethics publishing. And in that sense, I will be talking a bit about publication ethics. This, I suspect, will not be news to Ruth, to Heather, and the colleague from nursing ethics. Over there, Sussex, yeah, I didn't see you, okay. So, this is a slide, by the way, that is terrible, I know this. No, it's not actually. It's much better on your screen than on my computer screen. You can barely see it. I owe this to Bob Baker, who kind enough helped me out with the PDF. I take it you copied from the book. So this is all terrible, obviously, because the copyright, of course, is owned by Georgetown University Press, goes without saying. This thing, methods of empirical bioethics, I thought was quite interesting, because what it shows to you is the types of methods, basically, that empirical bioethicists, which really are people that use empirical methods within questions that have to do with bioethics, what they use. And there is no big surprise that the largest pile, of course, really about a quarter, are kinds of questionnaires. Then you have comparisons, another 20%, evaluation studies, and then it goes down fairly quickly. This is interesting because when you look at the next slide, and this is probably what is the important bit, what we have seen in bioethics is that particular journals, for instance, the Journal of Medical Ethics, over the years have begun publishing increasingly empirical contents of various kinds compared to other bioethics journals, such as, for instance, the Journal of Medicine and Philosophy or the Hastings Center report. And to quote from one study, empirical bioethics has accounted for about 8% of all bioethics papers in the 1980s, which has increased by 2005 to about 16%, so very significant increases. I will talk in a moment a bit about as to what I think the reasons are for this, and some of them are more flattering than others. The Belgians, Borey and Scotsman, reported in the Journal of Medical Ethics in 2006, in another empirical bioethics piece, incidentally, that the highest percentage of empirical research articles appeared in nursing ethics, followed by the Journal of Medical Ethics, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the Journal of Clinical Ethics. And these three journals alone account for about 85% of all empirical research in bioethics. And I thought that was very significant. What you got to keep in mind is that these guys only looked at bioethics journals, and they left out journals, medical journals, for instance, that of course publish a lot of this stuff too. So in that sense, you have to take this with a grain of salt, probably. They looked at 9 bioethics journals between 1990 and 2003. What I found interesting when I sort of did my own little survey, I discovered that debates about the conceptual problems with ethics and surveys, namely, what are actually the normative implications of knowing that 5,000 taxi drivers have views on cloning? What are actually the normative implications of this for doing bioethics in the first place? Well, this already was discussed in 1984 in the Journal of Medical Ethics, believe it or not. So the debates that we have today took place at that time too, except they didn't do that many surveys. But already people are asking, well, what is the point of doing all of this, other than knowing that people have views on certain things? So what I wanted to quote to you, funny enough, is also from our 25th anniversary issue, is from an article that Sue Sherwin wrote with regard to this, and it's to do with, and I quote her now, she's talking about research undertaken by another Canadian, Jocelyn Downey, at Dalhousie University, law professor there. And Jocelyn notes that millions of dollars in public money have been dedicated to bioethics research over the past decade. And she's suggesting that bioethicists should be wary of such largesse. Much of this money has been for targeted research, and as such it has skewed the directions of bioethics research activity. And here are the specific points that Downey is arguing. Downey argues that this sort of funding has led to a shift to empirical research in order to justify the need for large bioethics grants, encourage a lab model of bioethics to satisfy science-based funding agencies, and what they call it, encourage an entrepreneurial approach to bioethics that is, of course, narrowing the bioethics research agenda. And when you keep in mind, of course, that ever more of us are spending our lives in medical schools where funding is everything, you would understand this. Let's put it this way: it could be one explanation for why we see these dramatic increases in surveyitis, because there's more money to be brought into institutions. So I'm suspecting I'm not making only friends in this room today talking about provocation. So what I tried to do was a much smaller project, really. Unlike the other surveys that were undertaken with regard to empirical bioethics papers, what we try to do is we just try to grab some of the mainstream bioethics journals that have been around for a long time, that publish in reasonably high frequency, that is between 6 and 12 issues per year, and that are not specialist. In other words, we took out the nanotechnology stuff, we took out nursing ethics, we used like sort of mainstream, covering just about everything, bioethics and medical ethics journals. We undertook a manual categorization of peer-reviewed contents based essentially on title and abstract. The reason why we did this is because we discovered in the two surveys of empirical research that were undertaken, there were significant discrepancies with regard to what they thought the issues were, and this entirely had to do with the fact that the keywords that they used actually translate into conflicting information, because, and you can see this, you can easily put an HIV paper into public health. You can put it frequently into research ethics, into reproductive, into lots of different areas. As a result of that, we thought we wanted to actually read the whole abstract of the thing and look at the article title, and we moved from there in terms of categorizing it. Now, what are the limitations if you do this? The research assistants tasked with this work may well have miscategorized a small number of manuscripts, so I accept that. Secondly, the number of journals that we categorized obviously were very, very limited, and I'm not pretending that I really am able to claim that this is what is happening in the whole wide field of bioethics, but in those particular mainstream large journals. And importantly, non-English language journals were ignored, but this is a standard feature of bioethics anyway. So at least in English-speaking countries, I mean, nobody really, I think, in this room probably knows what is happening in China or in Germany. Very few exceptions. So this is a problem both about your globalization issue and internationalization, because we don't even speak the languages and know what others are writing. Think about the Iranian Journal of Medical Ethics, which exists, that I'm sure nobody has ever read in this room. So there are serious issues about that, right? If you have this claim that you want to do that. So on the next two slides, I just try to tell you basically what we have discovered, and the things that we have discovered is that clinical ethics publications in terms of quantity remain fairly stable over time. The same is true for bioethics, and medical ethics teaching also remains stable over time. You would not be too surprised that HIV/AIDS from the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s was fairly popular, and then sort of it turned really quiet. There was very little about HIV/AIDS, and then it came back suddenly under other guises. It suddenly was called global ethics and research ethics and reproductive health ethics. So it came back, but then it moved from should we quarantine people in San Francisco to what are we going to do to people in Zimbabwe, and how do we deal with access to medication? So the questions have changed. And really, these two HIV/AIDS things had nothing in common really with each other. Research ethics really sort of experienced sort of a peak around 1998. Then it got fairly quiet, and now there are very significant increases really on a year-on-year basis from 2005 onwards, both for the JME, for bioethics, and for the other journals. So research ethics has seen a deluge of academic publications. And in brackets, if you know how much money the US NIH is spending on research ethics training and capacity building and whatnot, you would understand why people write so much, because there's millions of US tax monies in research ethics activities. Global ethics, after 2000, I think it's fair to say that there's a very significant overlap with research ethics, because a lot of the stuff that is going in global bioethics is still about standards of care, public health research, and ethical issues, and so on and so forth, vaccine research, reproductive health issues, and so on and so forth. And you can see that when you actually look at those articles, it is not straightforward that you could say it is global ethics, unless you are really keen to get your label in some place. But otherwise, it's not straightforward actually to categorize these things. Neuroethics. I swear to you, when I started this, I thought, neuroethics, this is going to be the big thing, and there's like gazillions of articles, because to those of you who look closer at the academic journal activities, journal creation activities, at the moment we have 3 neuroethics journals, no less, right? 2 of them, I think, are sort of cheap ones, because there's simply somebody opened a folder on a web server and called it a journal, which is like open access. And one academic publisher seriously invested money into creating like a print journal and thought there's the future. What I found interesting is, for those mainstream journals, neuroethics got around, started in about 2005, 2006, but also seems to have peaked there, to be honest. There's an absolute absence of academic papers on research ethics. Very, very few papers, and I wish these 3 journals best of luck. Palliative care, and you know what, it might just happen, who knows, but I'm kind of skeptical. The other thing that surprised me is that palliative care and end-of-life issues remain absolutely a popular topic throughout all those years that we investigated. There's every year a really substantive number of articles that continue to be produced. And I think also, not surprisingly, this is a very popular topic with the survey people, the empirical bioethics people, because interviewing dying people, I mean, there's unlimited number of questions you can ask them. And the same is true actually, you know, for healthcare professionals dealing with these patients, and so on and so forth. Here's my big surprise. Beginning of life issues seems to really have peaked between 2000 and 2005, and after that, really a significant decline in reproductive health issues that are not HIV/AIDS and have to do with developing countries. It's a very small number of papers, and I wondered really what these declines had to do with the fact. Have we finally agreed that abortion is good or bad, or IVF doesn't matter anymore? Surrogacy, which was a big topic at one point, there's nothing, just about nothing any longer in the literature that you can find. Actually, they're still coming. Yeah, and to my own sorrow, I have to say book reviews seem to be a complete thing of the past. The JME, I think, hasn't published book reviews at least for a year now, at least according to the thing that I have. Bioethics, we always try, but really there's just about never space. I personally regret it, but the reality is that most of these journals that we looked at essentially have stopped producing book reviews, and I'll give you, I will have time, I'll give you some reasons for why I think this has happened. Now, the questions that I think are interesting and genuinely worthy of research projects, if you look for something that you could apply for funding for, is to ask the question whether these shifts that I've just described in terms of sort of what remains popular and what is going down, whether these are actually related to a however defined progress in bioethics. In other words, we actually resolved the problem as opposed to debating it forever. I kind of doubt that, but it's a possibility. Or whether simply there was no cash for particular issues, funding patterns. That is, when you think about the other thing also with funding patterns, brings me back to the empirical bioethics. I'm sure you can understand that when you think about the thing that we always have to fill in, and what is your research method, right? And what do us philosophers say? I'm going to think about it.